Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt from the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway, which is locked down. I am joined by Labor Secretary Eugene Scalia. You can follow him on Twitter at SecGene, G-E-N-E, Scalia. Got to go spell it out, Mr. Secretary, for the Steelers fans. Good to have you back. Welcome.
Hugh, good to join you again.
How is the Scalia clan far and wide?
My family's well. Thanks for asking. I have 8 brothers and sisters, and there are a lot of grandkids of my parents too. My mom lives near me, and she's had to stay at home, but we're checking in on her, and she's doing fine.
I was reminded last night, before I get to the substance, by a fellow Catholic friend that priests are particularly isolated. They live for their communities, their parishes, their congregations. How's your brother, the priest, doing?
Paul's doing well, and he actually wrote a really thoughtful piece about what you're describing, how being away from his congregation, his parishioners, was a reminder to him and fellow priests of what an important part of their role, just being out in the community, was. So, it's such a challenging time in so many ways, and as you're suggesting, we're being reminded of some things that are really very valuable, very important, that we might have come to take for granted just a little bit.
Well, those of us who are Catholics might pray a few beads for those priests who serve us so well and who are lonely. Now, Secretary Scalia, the business part. A lot of Americans are facing unemployment for the very first time. I'm 64 years old. I have worked continually since I'm 15. I've never had to file for unemployment benefits. I would have no idea how to do it. How do you do it?
Well, Hugh, I should say, first of all, that we just released our new numbers regarding initial claims for unemployment filed last week. And it's a very, very sizable number. Over 6.6 million new claims for unemployment were filed last week. The week before it had been nearly 3.3, which was a record, but this number is much higher, and it's very sobering. And it's a reflection, obviously, not of a fundamental weakness in our economy, but of some very hard measures we're having to take, and they're having a real impact on Americans across the country. So I wanted to pass that number along. And in terms of how you file, it's with the states. The Labor Department here in Washington, we help oversee the unemployment insurance system, but you file with your state unemployment insurance agency and make that claim, and then they process the claim from there.
Now, if you're in California, that would mean you would Google California State Unemployment Insurance Agency and follow the steps, correct?
That's right. I mean, that will find it for you. We're actually going to be posting on our website at dol.gov our own listing of the state unemployment insurance agencies in case people need help locating them. But sadly, these numbers that I just gave to you would indicate that people, if nothing else, are succeeding in finding the unemployment insurance agencies. And we'll continue to work with those agencies to facilitate their processing of these claims.
Now, I want to ask you a couple of specific questions that have come to my attention from people that I know. If you hold 2 or 3 jobs and you've lost one, are you eligible for unemployment benefits?
Well, it's going to depend on the rules of the different states, and it will depend also on how many hours you are putting in on those different jobs. I think typically in the states, and it will vary, but if you had 2 more or less full-time jobs, lose one, you're likely not going to be eligible for unemployment benefits. On the other hand, if they're both relatively short-term and now you're working less than, substantially less than half the week, you're probably eligible.
I do not think that's rational, Secretary Scalia, and I would urge you to consult with your counterparts at the state. People who work 2 full-time jobs are legendary in America, and they do it so their kids can go to college and that they can put food on the table, or so that a spouse can stay at home. I think they ought to be eligible because their lives depend upon 2 paychecks.
Well, it's going to be a challenging time for people who are out of work, whether they've had 1 or 2 jobs. And, Hugh, the president signed this legislation last week, the CARES Act. This is a $2.2 trillion relief package, and it does include, let me mention 2 things that are in it. One is a substantial increase in the payments that are available to the states under the unemployment insurance system. There are an additional $600 a week that are being made available by the federal government to supplement what the states make available. And the idea there is we really want to get as close as we can to making people whole for income they've lost from measures that we're having to take as a nation to protect the national health. So that is, I think, one good piece of news for people who find themselves having to apply for unemployment insurance. The other thing that, Hugh, I think in some ways is more important, it's a provision in the CARES Act that makes $350 billion in loans available to small business. And those loans are forgivable if those small businesses keep their workers on the payroll. And we really like that because we had a booming economy. You and I spoke just weeks ago, just record levels of unemployment, low unemployment, and rising wages. And if we can try to keep workers tied to their employer during this tough period we're in right now, it's going to enable the workers to get back to work more quickly. It's going to enable those businesses to get back up and running more quickly. So I do urge small business owners and employees of small businesses to look into these loans that are being made available by the Small Business Administration. It could help tide small companies over as we beat the virus, and also provide income directly from the employer to the employee.
And Mr. Secretary, I run the Nixon Foundation. It's my second hat because I have like four full-time jobs. I just do that. Luckily, they're all still there, and I'm already got our payroll people putting in the application for 250% of January payroll, and that's great. We're not firing anybody. I want to, however, adopt the position of counsel for the people with two jobs. I'm going to press you on this, Mr. Secretary, because this is something you folks can do. You can tell the states you will make them whole if they make whole people who hold two full-time jobs. And I got to stress, so many millions of people, if you want to make sure that there's no substantial decrease in the quality of life and income in the marketplace, we've got to recognize a whole bunch of people work two jobs, and we got to make them whole.
Yeah, look, you're right. I mean, those are great Americans. That's part of what the country was built on. I'll take a closer look, and as I say, I think those rules could vary by state. But Hugh, let's remember this: the majority of people that are filing for unemployment right now probably are doing so because they're in states where there are stay-at-home orders. So even if they have two jobs, it may not be possible for them to get to either of those. And so it's not just often in these circumstances a loss of one job if somebody had to. It's just a really very challenging situation.
Oh, it's so hard. And so I just would, if they had two and they have none, I would give them two. Let me ask you about gig economy people. I used to take Ubers 3 times a day. I drive myself everywhere because I can't get sick. So if I have to go to a studio, I drive myself. The gig economy is crushed. What does the bill do for them? It
provides unemployment benefits for them too, and this is unprecedented. I mean, the bill really is a extraordinary attempt to cover so many different aspects of the problem we're dealing with right now. And as you know, Leader McConnell, the president, were able to get this done, really very quickly on a bipartisan basis. So yes, for I think the first time the federal government is making the unemployment insurance benefits available for people who aren't in a direct employment relationship either. Gig workers can get that money applying through essentially the same process for those unemployment insurance payments. I also want to commend some of these gig companies that stepped forward and said, these, in their view, technically are not our employees, but we're also going to make paid sick leave available to them. That was done by, I think, a couple of the major gig companies. Uber did it. And that was a nice thing to see, and it was just one instance of the way companies are stepping forward now to help us during this challenging time. We look to the government in crises like this, but we ought to remember, too, that just great strength and resources that our private sector gives us, and it's an advantage we have over every other nation in the country, and it's nice to see them stepping forward, too.
Let me ask you about commission-driven workforce. Realtors, haberdashers. I think of the guy who sold me suits for 30 years. I go in once every 2 years because I hate to buy clothes. I don't know if you're a clothes hound or not, Eugene Scalia. I doubt it. But there are a bunch of people whose commissions might have gone from a very robust to a very anemic level of income. How do we help them?
Well, I think there are a couple different ways that there might be relief for the people you're mentioning. Some will be, independent contractors, like the gig workers you were talking about, who might be able to get unemployment insurance by that mechanism. Others will be essentially small business operators. That's another way of looking at it. And the small business loans that I mentioned to you, which tied people over, small businesses, and they're forgivable if they keep their payroll intact. Those loans may also be available to sole entrepreneurs or all other small business people.
Hey, quick question since I got the Secretary of Labor. How long do I have to keep my payroll intact to have it forgiven?
I don't have the exact number. I think it's for a period of a couple of months. It might be an 8-week period that we're looking for people to do that in order to have that loan fully forgiven.
All right, you're a wizard. Just please keep deregulating and pushing out help. I mean, the more money we flood the system with, right, the better off the recovery will be.
It's just, Hugh, those were words I never thought I'd hear you say.
Yeah, you bet.
But look, you're right. This is an extraordinary time, and we need to. We're asking for great sacrifices from American men and women, and we need to try to make them whole and sustain them during that period. And of course, as they get money in their pocket, it puts us in a better position to start this economy back up again. We had such a strong economy under the president's leadership just a month ago.
Mr. Secretary, the president is considering the moral equivalent of war bonds. I know that. Victory bonds in World War II, Liberty bonds in World War I. I think the American public in small denominations would flood in. Those of us who have jobs and are thankful for it would buy these bonds to assist in the recovery and the payment for this. Have you had a chance to discuss that with him yet?
I'll leave that decision to the president and the Treasury Secretary and others who want to look at different financing mechanisms. I will say that the analogy to the kinds of things that we do in wartime is appropriate. I think you sort of cycle back through American history. You probably have to go back to World War II to find a time where there were such sacrifices being asked for from the American people and such a challenge to the country. And so I certainly understand how that is a topic under consideration.
Well, I hope you give them some thought. And I also hope that you greet Father Paul on behalf of everyone listening and everybody else who's in the ministry. On behalf of Eugene Scalia and I, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Take care.
I want to remind everyone, relief